The Gulf Coast Growth Show is sponsored by Chevron Pasadena Refinery and is an extension of the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region, where our mission is to market and grow a vibrant regional economy. All right, guys, hey, and welcome back to the Gulf Coast Growth Show. I'm your host, Jason Lee, and again, with my co-host, Zeke Smith. We are glad to have you, and again, as kind of our annual rundown and then forecast for the upcoming year, we're joined by Chad Burke. Glad to have you.
Great to be here, Jason.
Yeah.
Zeke, good to have you here.
Thanks, Chad. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're going to do some great things this season. New studio, new co-host, and new vibe. I think just in general, and it's going to be a great year for us. Chad, really, as we always do, we just love to kind of hear from you, know what's been going on. So maybe you can kind of, for those who are new and or just tuning into this episode, give us a quick rundown of what you guys do here at the Economic Alliance, but then kind of what took place last year, your highlights, and then maybe what you guys are forecasting as far as major projects and things for this year.
Good. Yeah, so anytime in front of anybody or a microphone, I have to give the mission of the Economic Alliance, right? So we're a regional nonprofit economic development corporation made up of 12 cities, the Port of Houston, Harris County, and then 250 private companies like y'all's that are members of ours that help us do our work in the region. The mission of the organization is really simple and very repeatable, and something that we talk about all the time. That's simply to grow this region's economy. A lot of people ask me, I tell them, hey, I'm in economic development, and the first question is, what does that really do, right? So, and it boils down to this. We are fighting for capital investment dollars in this region. We are competing with other locations along the Texas Gulf Coast, Mexico, Asia, the Middle East for manufacturing and then supply chain logistics projects that support that. It's the largest petrochemical manufacturing complex in the world. We've come off a decade of unprecedented growth, over $100 billion in new growth along the Houston Ship Channel over the last 12 years, and that investment continues to roll in because we have an advantage when it comes to oil and price of natural gas, which are the primary feedstocks for what we manufacture here. So that's who we are. Everything that we do feeds into us being competitive. So if you got a baseball team, a football team, basketball team, you want to practice to be as good as you can because everything's a competition. With those capital investment dollars, they evaluate us here in the Houston Port region. They evaluate the Golden Triangle, Freeport, Louisiana, Mexico, Singapore, all around the world to say, where can I build that facility to maximize my profitability and success in that venture. And so everything that we do at the Economic Alliance revolves around that. But our key metrics, coming back to the core mission, the key metrics that we track are: how many projects do you have in your pipeline? How many projects came to fruition, were announced as wins, and began construction in that year? And then how many jobs were created from that? Direct jobs, not just the indirect, because the indirect is a huge multiplier in the petrochemical industry, but direct jobs. And we count those numbers every year. Nice. So let's look back at 2022. Very, very successful year in this region for economic development. We had 3 announced project wins that we contributed to. There are projects that are happening that we don't get to touch, but there are 3 of them, very significant petrochemical projects that were announced last year that we worked on, totaling $1.6 billion in new capital investment.
Wow.
Little over 300 direct new jobs. And all 3 of them last year, if I'll run down this rabbit hole real quickly, were really interesting projects and kind of a peek into what's happening right now in the petrochemical and energy industry. So first project, the biggest project was with Oxy, $1 billion project to do to expand and create a brand new chloralkali unit that will feed into the hydrogen market, right? So you begin to talk about energy transition and how hydrogen will be used. We'll see a lot of that discussion this year, throughout the year in this region, and even into our Gulf Coast Industry Forum, which happens later in September. Right. We've got a lot of really interesting projects kind of ginning right now towards energy transition. good capital investment, job creating type of jobs. So that was kind of like the lead horse of those three projects. Next is a phenomenal project, which I know we're recording this today, but in the podcast terms, you heard from Tiffany Steele last week,
right,
about their fantastic LTO project at Chevron, right? So Chevron is spending between $400 and $450 million upgrading that Pasadena refinery, and taking advantage of that crude that comes out of their own fields here in Texas, pipeline it to this facility, refine it into products that we can use in America, whether it's diesel, gas, aviation fuel, or high-end military aviation fuel. So lots of great things. So really interesting project. And then finally, the third one, I don't want to call it a smaller project when something's over $100 million,
right,
but between $100 and $200 million project with Konica to use new technology out of Japan, their Japanese-owned company, to manufacture biodegradable plastic.
Wow!
Right, game changer when it comes to this industry. Right, so it's a great new project, great new technology. Their first customer in the U.S. is Frito-Lay's. So their first product, once it's up and running and built, will be in the potato chip bags that we eat and dispose of, and now those will be easily used or biodegraded in the landfills. So just interesting projects.
Amazing.
I didn't mean to run too far down that rabbit hole.
I feel less guilty about eating so many Fritos, you know?
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So just, and that's really the joy of what we do, is we get to help and peek into those projects that are really changing products in the way the world will use them moving forward, right? I mean, one of my trucks is a diesel. I don't like $5 gas diesel, so I'm really happy that Chevron is upgrading that facility, right? So it's the little things like that.
Right.
But so that's last year. Great year. Lots of good things going on. So now we want to look into 2023. Our current project pipeline is about, I think as of yesterday, 24 potential projects that we have that could come to fruition. The total capital investment for that is a little over $6 billion. So still healthy for us. Absolutely. In this region, and somewhere north of 2,500 direct jobs that if everything came to fruition. Now, it's not all going to. We average somewhere between 4 and 6 projects a year over the last decade. It'll be interesting to see what comes to fruition this year, what really is announced and begins to be built. We've had a really, again, kind of talking about the times that we're in, one of the neatest projects, we've got several of them going on, but I'll highlight one real quickly. It's a $500 million manufacturing facility that will be, if we land it, will be subsidized by the federal government to reshore manufacturing of non-woven materials. Now think through this for just a minute. We went through COVID almost 3 years ago now, we just now kind of came out of it. Non-woven materials are made from the products that we make here out of the petrochemical industry. It comes from several of our member companies, whether that's Exxon or LyondellBasell or Chevron Phillips Chemical, right? And they go into things like masks and medical bandages and all kinds of PPE equipment. Over the last several decades, 3 or 4 decades, the U.S. has basically exported that production. So you can guess where it's produced right now, right? So it's made over in China. And then if something like COVID comes along and we all of a sudden find ourselves short of that product and we don't make it here, then that's when you see disruptions in things, just like in the semiconductor industry. We don't make a lot of them here, right? And so now we as a country have decided it's very important for us to self-insure by manufacturing critical things here in this country. So this project is it's a family-owned business. They're out of Kentucky. They've got 2 different plants. They've been manufacturing this for a long time. This is a chance for them to add a 3rd facility. And when they looked all around the country, they said, well, our feedstock comes from Houston. We're right next to the port of Houston if we can manufacture here. The workforce is here.
Absolutely.
Why don't we locate this new facility here in Houston?
Wow.
And so we're supporting that project in several different ways, and we're hopeful that they will be awarded that project, because if they do, we know right where it's going to be built, and it's a $500 million manufacturing project.
Oh my
right?
gosh!
So that's a cool project that we're working on right now, and there are a couple others just like that. So what will fall out this year, you never can really predict. Every now and then we'll sandbag a project and say, okay, it happened in December, let's announce in January. But I'm not sure what's gonna be announced this year, but I feel confident we'll have some really exciting announcements before the end of the year. Chad Carson is our VP of Economic Development, does a fantastic job of shepherding those projects and working them through and really kind of building the case for why they should invest here.
Well, the first thing I would say is that the team's work and the behind the scenes work and the countless hours of work, I think a lot of times people get the perception because they see these events.
Yeah.
And they think that this organization's about events.
That's a great point, Jason.
You know, and so and the events are great because the events tell the story and they bring the community together and they do all these things. But the real work.
But the real work, right?
The real work. So you know, it's not. I mean, because let's be clear, like something like Gulf Coast Industry Forum, that's countless hours, countless manpower, countless time. But then in between all that, we were having a discussion earlier. I think you said you do upwards of 60 plus presentations a year.
Yeah.
Those are presentations that are about projects.
Exactly.
Those are presentations that are about
what's
should bring
going on in here.
Yeah. So I just think that helps kind of people tell the story. So if they're ever wondering where the gray comes from.
Yeah. That's a good point, and one that we probably don't make often enough. The dynamic that makes the events that we host so valuable to our members is because of the network of companies and stakeholders and cities, agencies that are part of the Economic Alliance. With all the project work and all the policy work and infrastructure and workforce development work, we have this abundance of really interesting key information that can help businesses do business and network with others. And so any event that we do, it's a byproduct of the core of our business, which is to grow the region. And then it's our goal with that event to push that information out to member companies so that they can then either do business better or work with other members, right? And so this podcast is a direct reflection of that. You and I talked when we first kicked this off. This is a mini Gulf Coast Industry Forum on the podcast, because we take the information that we get from the fun stuff that we are doing all the time behind the scenes, working on projects and infrastructure and policy and things like that, and then we bring that information out to share with everybody.
Right.
And so this is another format to do that, but that's the dynamic that comes from the core business that we do that is really so much fun and really rewarding when you get I'll get a phone call from a plant manager who says, Chad, can you help me with this problem? And then we take a couple of steps. We went through that just this week. And worked with an outage situation with a utility company, and we were able to, by just putting two parties together, save this company a potential $5 million bill from having an outage when they didn't want to.
Wow.
And so, I mean, the value that we can bring just by networking is really immeasurable compared to kind of the stats that we always do. But it's all about sharing that information.
I just wanted to make sure we added some emphasis to all of how all those things work in concert there, because it's all one moving piece to tell the entire story.
It really is.
Yeah, the events for me feel like a celebration of all the work.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So,
that's the brag at the end of the year.
Absolutely.
Like, hey, we did all this work, but look, man, we got these awesome brand new projects that just came to this region, and these jobs were created. So that's the good stuff.
Now, you guys bumped into each other in Austin recently, right? So.
We did, yeah. So we were both at the at Legislative Day. So it was Chemical Day, and it was Associated Builders and Contractors Day, ABC of Texas Day, amongst other. There was teachers and sheriffs, and they have these legislative days.
I think
in Austin,
Brazoria County was there.
They were. Pearland was
there.
Day. Yeah. So
it was a good day.
It sort of reflective, like you said, of the diversity of our membership here. So the most diverse organization that I've ever been a part of, and I give you a quick pat on the back to say I've championed something you told me 4 or 5 years ago is like our goal is for members to do business with members.
Yeah.
So certainly a mission. Other mission, you said policy. So being in Austin, Legislative Day. It's sometimes spelled Leg Day. It's not. I know you get confused by that, Jim Rat. Leg Day. It's like Leg Day. That's Thursdays is Leg Day, but
I'm retired, Jim Rat.
Legislative Day, Ledge Day. But Chad, if you wouldn't mind, let's explain to our audience a little bit what we're doing up there. We're not just going up and having cocktail hours. We're actually, speaking of doing some real work, there's some really interesting work going on. So.
Yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of times if you don't, you see the activities, but you're not like, okay, why are y'all really doing that? This goes right back, and I mentioned it at the beginning, I mention it all the time. Everything that we do supports our mission. Our mission is to grow the economy. To grow that economy, we have to be competitive on all fronts. We have to have a good workforce. We have to have good policy. So businesses and regulations to those businesses are such that give them the opportunity to succeed. We have to have good infrastructure. Well, guess what? Infrastructure comes from policy. You know, that's a lesson I've learned over the years, right? So anytime that we are in Austin or in DC, we are trying to sharpen the sword, if you will, in our region for our competitiveness, right? So, and right now it's game day in Austin and in DC for us, right? We're in a state legislative odd year, so we're in session right now. The Economic Alliance has its annual trip to Washington, D.C. to advocate with all its stakeholders. That happens in March of this year, in a couple of weeks. And so we're fighting fires. We're battling on both fronts right now in Austin and in D.C. So our white paper in Austin is filled with about a half a dozen issues that all really circle around what I would call infrastructure. And I mentioned this earlier. So infrastructure to us is we make things here and we move things here, right? And that's what we do in this region. We make things and we move things. So that includes road infrastructure, freight-related infrastructure. How are we moving people and product through the region? And then it includes infrastructure on the water, right? With the Port of Houston's Project 11 expansion project, we've got specific dock expansions that are coming. And then I consider workforce development infrastructure. If you're going to build a plant, the first thing that you want to know is, are there enough trained people, qualified trained people in this area to build, maintain, and operate that facility, right? That goes into the cost calculation to determine where that facility is built. So that's infrastructure. That's the same calculation that they'll put on transportation and their supply chain. How long does it take me to get this product from this facility to a packaging or to a port facility, and what's the cost related with that, and then what's the eventual cost if I'm shipping it overseas or if I'm railing it inland, right, or if I'm piping it. So those transportation costs, again, feeds right back into infrastructure. So people say, what are you doing in Austin? What are your priorities? Infrastructure. Because we've had $100 billion worth of investment in 10 years. We've got more investment coming. We have to keep the infrastructure on pace with that growth in manufacturing. And I've said this, but it's not like an axiom, but infrastructure does not move at the pace of business and manufacturing.
Right.
So it just takes a lot longer to do it. It's a heavier lift. It's public money generally.
Right.
So you've got a lot of work to do. You got to pull in all your partners, and you got to lean on your legislators in Austin and in D.C. to make that happen. We just got a beautiful letter back from the trip that we were up there, a couple of weeks ago. One of our top priorities were 2 road infrastructure projects around the intersection of Beltway 8 and 225, and around 225, 146 into Barber's Cut Terminal. Just got a beautiful letter written from Senator Carol Alvarado to the chairman of the Texas TxDOT Commission, highlighting these projects, advocating for us, encouraging them to prioritize and fund these projects.
Fantastic.
That just came into my desk this week.
Wow.
From the trip that we made, and that went directly to the TxDOT Commission, the Transportation Commission out of Austin. So it's those types of activities that we're doing that hopefully have real teeth in them, and help us move that ball down the field, before the session's over.
So that pothole that's in front of your neighborhood that keeps making you mad, well, you're calling the wrong people.
Chad's your guy, yeah.
Chad's your guy. So his number's 832. No, I'm just kidding.
So the 3-legged stool of infrastructure is how we make things, how we move things, and the people that do both.
Exactly.
All right,
That's
perfect.
well said.
Yeah, brevity. So in Austin, infrastructure being the summary, what are the Economic Alliance, not Chad Burke's, but the Economic Alliance and our members, what are our legislative priorities around infrastructure that we were going up to visit with legislators, staff members, and others those couple of days, and then obviously with the DC trip coming up? So what are the priorities?
Yeah, so in Austin, there are specific freight-related projects that we talked about. There is continued funding for the Gulf Coast Protection District, which is the state agency that oversees the Hurricane Surge or Coastal Spine Project.
Okay.
And then kind of, again, part of one of those additional legs is workforce development funding, which is, you could substitute that language for community college funding, because in our industry, community colleges do a tremendous amount of training.
Absolutely.
Feed a lot of those people into, and
Speaking my language here.
they're redeveloping the way that funding mechanism works during this session. So
Right.
it's high on the priority list as well. And to be perfectly honest, our Washington D.C. White paper, which is currently under kind of final development right now, looks very similar, because you've got the same infrastructure type of projects, you've got
Right.
workforce development, and you've got regulatory items on there, and then like I said, kind of the infrastructure at the federal level is more water based, because it has to do with the Houston Ship Channel.
So assumedly, both Texas and federal are going to be targeted around making it easier for the Kentucky business, the family-owned business, and to come here and set it up, right? To get things out of their way, so they
Yeah.
can come here and make the game-changing, revolutionary products that we need here.
That's
right?
a perfect example of if you took one specific project like that and you kind of held that up and you said, what do we need to do to fight for this project?
Right.
You can look at our white paper priorities in Austin and DC, and you can see that we're fighting for the items that make us successful to get that project.
to open
So-
that door for
How
them
to get them here, how to get stuff in and out of here, and then how to get the people to staff it.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
they're looking at California or Mexico or Florida or even down the coast of Texas, right? And so
Yep.
it's like, what's this region have to offer me that's light years ahead or better
Exactly.
than other?
I mean, I always tell people like this: if you're going to make, if you're going to build a cookie factory, right? You're going to make chocolate chip cookies. Where do you
Yes.
want to build it? Right? Yes is the answer. Right? Where do you
Always
wanna build-
yes on the cookie factory.
You want to build it somewhere where your inputs are cheap and your customers are close, and that's what we provide here. You know, that's the way to look at it.
Any specific bills or legislators you've had great visits with you want to discuss that they're just, we have lots of supporters of the Alliance. Obviously, we have speakers and lots of folks are involved.
Yeah, it just covers a lot of different items,
Right.
You know, and a lot of times it's funding, so we're looking to try and, rather than a bill, we're trying to get specific allocations through OMB and things like that. So,
Sure.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff going on.
Well, we're nearing the end of our time. So, is there anything specifically that you wanted to cover, or anything that you feel like maybe we didn't capture that we need to make sure our audience hears?
Now, I think this is a great conversation. I love having it with you guys, especially at this time of year. It looks like a very interesting year. I mean, we've got great momentum, a lot of good things going on. We've never had over 40 people request to go to the DC trip with us. It's probably closer to 45 right now.
That's
so
exciting.
It's just indicators like that. You just
Yeah.
got a lot of good people that are like, hey, we want to be part of what's going on in that region, and we want to help support it. And it's everybody from, you know, it's the whole array. It's industry, it's Port of Houston, it's City of Houston, it's mayors, you know, stakeholders across the board.
I think you're underrating the interesting year. I mean, by the record-breaking number at the membership gala that evening
Yeah.
to now DC trip. I mean, it may be a banner year for
I
Alliance.
hope so. I
Yeah.
hope so. 2022, by all counts, you know, 2019 was the benchmark that everybody kind of goes by because what happened in 2020. With 2022 surpassed 2019, so
Right.
we'll hope to do the same thing again this year on all fronts.
Well,
Excited.
congratulations on a great year. You've built a phenomenal team. They consistently show up and do great things. And again, behind the scenes, so much of your work is done behind the scenes, but the accolades come when we get to see the events come together and really tell the full story. So
Yeah.
we're excited to have you here today. For our audience, as always, we would encourage you to consistently stay tuned in, but stay plugged in and get connected. Come to the events, come in, get your organization. Don't just stroke a check and put your name in a banner, but get plugged in and start making an impact. There's tons of committees to serve on. There's tons of committees to get plugged into, and somebody in this team can help you find a place where you fit and then get you to work
Yeah.
on making an impact. It's great for your business, great for your own personal development, and great for your community. So tune into us next week and stay connected to the Gulf Coast Growth Show. Chad, again, we're glad to have you.
Good
Zeke,
deal.
excited
Thanks, both of you.
conversation today. We'll see you guys next week.
Outstanding.
Thanks for tuning in, and be sure to go to the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region website and subscribe to our channels. And let's pay it forward by sharing the good news of what's happening in our region by passing this episode to somebody you know.